There's usually a lot of judgment that comes up around making peace with our present reality. There's like usually a long list of things that come up that are not okay right now, that we assume aren't okay right now. And a lot of those things have to do with the mind and the body kind of being at war. So we're gonna go through like a 3-step process today of the approach when we are feeling like the mind and body are at war, and when we're trying to get to the goal of that tranquility within ourselves, that unity between the mind and the body. So it's really a 3-step process. And the first one is that we have to first notice that it's easier to fight with others than to fight with ourselves. Whenever it comes to discipline, it's much easier to discipline someone else or critique someone else. But to critique ourselves can be really challenging, and to look within and to navigate, sometimes we don't even know where to look. So it's much easier to point outward than at somebody else than point inward. And what that ends up doing is creating a really uncomfortable environment in general. But when we want to heal and like an isolated part of ourselves or a character trait or just something that we're struggling with, we have to kind of get the body and the mind on the same page, which is really, really important. And a great way to balance this out is knowing the difference between knowing in your head and understanding it in your body. So a really simple one would be, if you think about like a smoker, for example. He knows in his head that smoking's bad, and he decides, okay, I'm going to stop smoking. I'm going to try to stop smoking. And it comes time for him to, the first craving comes on, and he goes for that cigarette, and he's like, nope, I'm not gonna do this. But what ends up happening is his mind, right? Because he knows in his head that if he doesn't stop, smoking will kill him. But as he goes for that cigarette and he resists, right? And he's like, nope, I'm not gonna do this. His body tells him that if he doesn't have the cigarette, he's also gonna die. Because whatever that belief and habit that he's already built or that's ingrained is so ingrained that he believes, right? Because his crutch, that reach, is so concrete at this point that he has this kind of false belief that if he stops, he's going to die. Just like with any kind of addiction or any kind of thing. So just notice in your life how that, where in your life if you've experienced that kind of experience. And then what happens is when that happens, then he usually gives in to having the cigarette, because that's stronger, because that habit has been repeated so many times. It's one after the next after the next. Same with like a cell phone, with reaching for our cell phone. Like for a lot of people, if you're sitting and waiting and you have nothing to do, or you're feeling uncomfortable, we just grab the phone. And what happens is you can be pushing nothing. There could be nothing going on, in the sense that you're scrolling or searching. And that's kind of where we go for the search, right? We go for the seeking rather than the seeing, right? Where in life the goal is to be able to see clearly, not constantly be in this space of lure of the search, even though it's extremely enticing. Now, why this is so important is because when you think of that lure, we're so addicted to the lure of it that when I ask you what you really want and I put that thing right in front of you and I'm like, okay, I can solve that problem, there's a fear that shows up, because then what happens is that pattern that we've created of seeking or reaching, right? So just like with the cigarette, it's that reach, the purpose that addiction has created. And when we talk about addiction, we're not talking about like the big stuff. I'm talking about the teeny tiny micro things that we do on a day-to-day basis that we assume give us purpose, and we assume are helping us get to our destination. But what's happened is we've adopted these habits out of survival, and the head knows one thing. The head knows that we should stop, but the body, to have purpose, is feeling that it has to continue in this cycle. So, and if you don't, and the body's telling you, if you don't continue in that cycle, it's almost like you're going to lose purpose or you're wasting your time, whatever those narratives are. So it's really important to notice when your mind and body are not on the right page, not on the same page. A great way to do this is to ask yourself, what do you want? Okay? If we put all the guns down, right? If we eliminate all the threats and all the things, if we eliminate all the things and I say to you right now, you can have the thing you want. Are you in a position to receive it? Are you in a position to perform in a way where it's going to be constructive to this desire? And if the answer is yes, then you have to ask yourself, what are the things what are the steps I need to take towards that? If not, you have to ask yourself, am I so addicted to my patterns or my beliefs, even one that might say I'm not good enough or I'm not ready, right? Or I might not be able to. Those are things that at the end of the day can sabotage the desire. And that's the illusion, like what I shared with last week with light and money. Like so many people just say, I need more money. It's the finances. And again, that's also a lure. That's like one of the largest lures nowadays, is saying to yourself, I need money rather than I need that light, right? That space, that illumination, that spiritual connection, my body and my mind at peace, that flow. So that is even the biggest one. And especially, and the approach to that, which I find is always fascinating, is when a lot of people think of their spiritual practice or leveling their spiritual practice or leaning into their spiritual practice, they think of it as restrictive. And the reason a lot of times restriction comes up is because of the addiction we have to all the external things. And when we know that the only way to be at peace with ourselves is if our body and our mind and our soul are completely united. But there's, we don't want that. We want the chase. There's this excitement in the chase. So in number 2, it's getting the mind and the body on the same page and noticing that what will feel like death in itself, right? The body will tell you, no, without it, I don't have a purpose, might just be the habit in itself dying. Because a lot of times, I had this happen to me a couple months ago, where I was doing some healing work, and I felt that genuine emotional experience of dying. I felt like I was dying. I started going around feeling like there was death looming. And Baruch Hashem, I'm in a good place. And so I had to say to myself, well, what is this? What is going on? What I realized was, when I was feeling that experience of death, it was the sense of me shedding. There were habits shedding. And when habits shed, it feels like death. It feels like dying. And it could be that misconception where sometimes, and again, I always say consult your doctor and all the rest. But on a day-to-day basis, if there is something that we see or have that perception of, oh my gosh, it feels like I'm dying, or something within me is dying, if you're going through a healing process, there's a huge possibility that you're shedding. There's a shedding happening where you're letting go of something, and there's a misconception of it feeling almost suicidal. So whenever that kind of thing happens, there's that, little bit of happiness within. But what I have to do is curate that environment within myself to put the conflict on pause and really allow myself to relax in and lean in and allow the healing to do its thing. And then going back to that list of wants of what did I want? And if the want is to let go of certain things, right? If I want to be living in a proactive experience and in my full self, be able to connect completely and have that unity, that emotional and spiritual, physical unity, I got to stop fighting with myself and with others. But what happens is I got to let go. So then you have to ask yourself, what do you want more? Do you want to move forward? Do you want to be at peace in your presence? Or do you want to commit to the misery or the narrative or the animated story that we've created and said 1,000 times to all the people around us as we look for pity, almost like charity? And that's something that's so impactful, where it's like, when we suffer and when we have pain, it's almost like we're going out into the world with this open arm, with this open hand, asking for somebody else's pity. Yes, talk to somebody, 100%, work on the things you need. But the difference is when we come to that conclusion, right? And this is going to be leaning into that third part, is when we come to the conclusion that we want to commit to the body and the mind being on the same page, we're not going to be leaning outward. We're going to be leaning inward. And rather than looking for that compassion, right? The pity or the compassion, what we're going to look for is the strength and the courage within for this specific exercise. To get the mind and the body on the same page, there has to be this constant emotional regulation where we do this practice of getting the mind and the body on the same page, thinking of it almost like an elevator. And a great exercise which you can try is, when we're sitting in this kind of position, is notice when you have an uncomfortable thought that comes up or an uncomfortable emotion that comes up. Notice if it's in the mind or if it's in the body. Then notice what's attached to it. And then you get into that elevator, if it's in your body or in your mind, wherever that is. And escorted by breath, you move it from the mind to the body, like the elevator going down. Or the opposite way, if it's in the body, you use the body, you start in the body and you go up to the mind. And what you try to do is notice how that feels in the mind, what the mind has to say about it. And you can do this when you're outside of a trigger, because again, when we're sensitive and overwhelmed, this can be really, really challenging. But on your like in your quiet time, I love doing this like Shabbos morning, because I feel like I just feel like I have the most peace of mind, and I can't be distracted. So I grab a warm drink and I sit with myself and I start this kind of process. And you go from the mind to the body, and then back to from the body to the mind, moving through slow breath and just noticing, is my body and my mind on the same page? And if it's not, you just keep working through knowing, asking yourself, well, what do I really want? And then just keep moving through it until you get the clarity. If these things don't happen, so the question is like this: when we don't work on these kind of things, there are some side effects. And the side effects is, it's really as simple as, if you think about a relationship, right? Having a partner, right? Because the mind and the body are partners. In your life, if you have other partners, whatever that is, your children, your parents, we live in communities. None of us live alone. So it's noticing and taking accountability for us living in this kind of society, right? So thinking about neglecting your partner can lead to breakdown of the marriage. And thinking of even if you are living alone, right? So the thing is even if you're living alone, you're still living in your mind and in your body. And the only way to allow other people into our life, is to get those two on the same page. Because they're not at peace. Because if we're not at peace, that is not, your body and your mind are not going to be at peace. So what happens is when we neglect one or the other, it literally leads to breakdown. It leads to breakdown at some point when there's neglect. So it's one of those things that we have to know, that to be able, it's a daily avoda. It's a daily work. Somebody said to me once, they asked me, why do I need a daven? Why do I need to talk to Hashem? Like, why? And I said to them, well, he should know I love him and care, or whatever. And I said, when you think of a partner, when you think of your own partner, any partner in life, if you have a healthy partner, in the sense of you want a healthy relationship, you're going to communicate with that partner. That's what keeps the relationship up, is when you have a relationship, you are communicating with that partner. So when we're trying to create quality relationships with God or the people in our life, it's really, really important to start with ourselves. Because if we are neglecting a part of ourselves and we're not communicating, there's that sense of isolation. There's that sense of neglect that we end up experiencing. And then it reflects into the relationships outside of our body. So it starts within, really. That interior design really, really starts within. So take that time to really build that. And the way that you build this is by building routine. The beauty of Judaism, and I can't say this enough, is there is a sense of routine. And some people will say, I don't like when people tell me what to do. I hear that. But there is something really fundamental about having routine. Making time for the things that are important to you. It's an investment. And the beauty of Yiddishkeit is having a structure, a daily structure and a weekly structure, and then a yearly structure. And even now, coming into Rosh Hashanah, there's this beauty of tshuva, which I talk about in meditation all the time, is like using that practice of return, right? It's not about not doing bad things, as people say. It's about noticing what is going on and then returning, constantly returning. And one of the greatest meditations you can do, if you have no other meditation to do, is experiencing this experience of return, where you sit with yourself for about 13 minutes. Andrew Huberman said from neuroscience, this really works, where you sit with yourself for 13 minutes. You don't think about anything specific. All you do is notice when your mind drifts away, and you return it back to your body. And then notice it drift off again, and then you return it back to your body. In Judaism, we do this on a daily basis, and we do this on a yearly basis. And when we think about Rosh Hashanah, and we think of these times, right, the month of Elul, this is what that is that we constantly take that time. It's a whole month of returning back to yourself, returning and aligning to your emotional self, your spiritual self, your physical self, because we are in this world in a body, and sometimes the soul is just buried underneath all of it. And as we chase finances, we forget that the battery that keeps us going is light and that illumination, that spiritual torch. So I encourage you all to, as you move into your day today and into Shabbos and into Elul, to lean into that light, lean into strengthening those habits, build routine, build healthy routine and strong relationships. And what that does is it prevents infidelity, which sounds crazy, but infidelity, when we think of infidelity on a personal level, is nothing can get in. As soon as you have a good relationship and a good routine eliminates that component of letting other things in. And it might feel restrictive, and it might feel like dying, right? Back to that. But at the end of the day, if we're building that routine and we're fortifying that structure, there's a lot of siyata d'shmaya that shows up in that day-to-day. We watch many doors open up, and it prevents other things from bleeding in. So again, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope this was helpful. I also want to thank you all. We hit that halfway mark with collecting for the phone line, which I really appreciate. And I'm so grateful to every single one of you, because every single one of you that show up as a light. And as I started class, I was sharing with Yocheved, but I'll share with all of you how valuable every single one of you are. Sometimes we don't think that us showing up matters, but every single one of you have a beautiful light and a beautiful presence. And by showing up for yourselves, you're showing up for others and really creating a space where this healing can be done and we could be living in our truth, right? So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Esther Levy, and this is an Ujjayi podcast practice. I have Interior Designer, the book Interior Designer, out, so feel free to check that out on my website. And I also do privates if anyone's ever interested in personal coaching, where we go a lot deeper into the structure of interior design. I look forward to continuing this practice, and for now, have a beautiful day, and to be continued.